as a quick preview for listeners, is Scott Walker, and then we're going to talk about a couple polls. We'll talk about the presidential election, and then we'll talk about actual policy change that happened. Instead of talking about people just jostling to decide who gets to make policy changes, maybe it'd be fun to talk about an actual law changing. I don't know. It's kind of interesting. It's like people changed laws and stuff. Yeah, it's like what happens because of elections. It's interesting. So kicking it off, Scott Walker had like one short comment about immigration that I feel like drove like 3 news cycles. It's
still driving news cycles right now as we speak.
It's just, and I know you follow this really closely. What's like the 30-second explanation of what he said and why people are excited about him saying it?
Well, there's his exact wording and then there's his exact meaning. And of course, these things are 2 different concepts, right? So what was his meaning? His basic meaning was this argument, which I think Ralph Stout had just published an article in the New York Times saying that he agrees with this point. It's not a ridiculous one, which is that we need to think about immigration not just in terms of, immigration is an unalloyed good, let's just let in as many people as possible, but we also need to think about it in terms of what it means for wages for people, particularly in the working class and blue-collar jobs and lower class, lower middle class jobs. That, if you let more people in, this is the standard economic argument, they're going to compete for others with jobs, specifically people who are already here, and is that what we want? And of course, the immediate argument that has been made, and not from the place you might expect it would be, which would be from the left, which would, hit GOP contender and, blah, blah, blah. No, but actually the real objections here come from the establishment conservative, the GOP establishment. It's been the standard attack of nativism. This is, anti-free trade. This is something I'll be thinking about carefully in the days to come, the way that free trade arguments and immigration arguments have kind of gotten conflated. They're kind of all getting lumped together. But there's been a lot of pushback on this from the right.
Yeah, and it's been very interesting sort of watching how it unfolds. And one thing that interests me is sort of where people align on this issue, because you talked about how there's sort of the establishment position and the Tea Party position, and I think that's kind of like that, in speaking very broadly, that's an easy way of talking about where people fall. But one thing I noticed was that the vast, it seemed like almost an overwhelmingly negative response to Walker. And I feel like the people who supported what Walker said and said this is a smart thing and this makes sense. Rich Lowry, my former editor at National Review, had an item up today on their site saying what Walker's saying is not crazy and not
good. I actually didn't see that.
A very short corner post, but and what Walker said is very much in line with National Review's editorial stance on immigration, which is that dramatically increasing legal immigration would drive wages down. NR is basically in the same camp as Sessions on most immigration stuff. Obviously, Senator Jeff Sessions from Alabama, who, for people who maybe don't follow immigration wonkery particularly closely, Sessions is the most vocal, energetic, aggressive voice opposing dramatic increases or even marginal increses in the legal immigration levels.
The true hawk in the GOP Senate caucus.
And perhaps the only one. The only one. He really decides what the conservative, it's hard to talk about this in language that's not biased, but far right, hard right, hawkish immigration policy is.
I prefer the term base. I think that's sort of neutral.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. Sessions, National Review, Breitbart obviously seemed incredibly supportive of what Walker said and wrote a bunch of stories about how everyone on the right loves Walker because he said this, and Walker's changed his position on immigration, even though what Walker said was not a policy position.
That's a second story, which we won't even get into. But anyway.
We don't have time.
Yeah, right.
So you kind of have like Breitbart, National Review, Jeff Sessions, Scott Walker, and then obviously I assume Tea Party groups like Numbers USA, FAIR, usual suspects, all kind of on one side. And then overwhelmingly, pretty much everyone else, and Douthit would be on that side at New York Times, pretty much everyone else was very critical. Sahil Kapoor wrote a thing for a Talking Points memo about how basically every Republican senator he talked to said Walker's being dumb, Walker shouldn't have said that. Obviously you're going to have Americans for Tax Reform, Grover Norquist, Chamber of Commerce, all the business-oriented groups are going to be opposing Walker or disappointed about what he said. And I think what's interesting to me about this whole thing is that Walker wasn't making a policy point. The only thing he said was we should think about the possibility that income levels affect wages in the United States. That's something we should think about. Walker is not taking policy positions. Walker has been incredibly gun-shy about taking policy positions. He doesn't want to take a policy position on anything. Unless we're talking about right to work, he doesn't want to talk about it at all, which is understandable.
Well, yeah, it's early to be committing yourself like that. Let's see what the national mood is in like 7 months, and then start taking decisions.
Exactly.
Right.
But it's interesting that like even just bringing up the idea that this should be a conversation topic or something we discuss, even just bringing that up has been. I mean, we're like 3 news cycles into it.
Okay, well, I mean, here's the thing. This is one of these. This sort of this eternal war between the rhinos, the establishment, and the base. The anger, sort of maybe more vocal in their reach and their ability to influence the conversation than they are in their actual numbers. Very online, kind of conservative base. There is the battle, the biggest, the harshest battle is about immigration. And I was talking about this earlier today. I said, like, listen, it's no secret that your front-running types, whether they come at this from a libertarian point of view like Rand Paul or even Ted Cruz, ironically enough, or they come at it from a much more sort of Chamber of Commerce establishment point of view, say like Jeb Bush, they're all in favor of immigration. But I said that there's a real problem with our discourse in the GOP in particular about the immigration issue. And the Democratic side, it's not as much of a problem simply because they're in favor of it anyways. Right. There are very few anti-immigration voices in the Democratic Party. It's basically Mickey Kaus and the one guy who's following him.
And a couple of unions. And
a couple of unions.
And the unions kind of capitulated to getting of aid and said, okay, you're giving us what we want, we'll deal with it. Exactly. And as I was saying earlier today, there are 2 key arguments in favor of rising immigration on the side of the GOP. Now, on the first, you have the Chamber of Commerce argument, which is the competition, free trade, lowered wages. That's the one that's actually angering a lot of the base activists these days, okay? Because they're saying, well, okay, who benefits from free trade? It certainly isn't you or me or the people who work these blue-collar jobs. It's the business class. It's sort of the opposite of the Romney, you didn't build that line that was taken in 2012, and maybe in a way it's sort of a reaction to the feeling that Romney completely failed to tune in with the 47%. Is this what 1995 was like? A Clinton running for president?
You mean like in NAFTA?
People yelling about free trade and competition and stuff. Like, I mean,
do you remember? I mean, you may have been too young. I don't know how old you are, Betsy, but I'm 35. Okay, so I grew up in the era of Ross Perot and the giant sucking sound. Like one of those things that I first remembered. I was like, must have been 12 years old. It's like we've been on TV with those infomercials. You can find them on YouTube. For like a half hour, he's putting up these big ass charts and graphs, and he's talking about how NAFTA is going to suck jobs, blue collar jobs away.
We'll find links and put them at the bottom of the
The thing is that everyone laughed at Perot. He's not really wrong. But the whole point is that he was underselling and underplaying the benefits, the economic benefits that came back to America in return. But my point is this. That's the one argument from increased immigration, and I think that that's not going to get a lot of purchase. There's another argument, and this is the one that I give Jeb Bush credit for, actually. He's the only one who's had the guts to bring it up, and he got chastised for it, and I do not think you will see him mentioning it again. The argument for immigration is the simple fact that we live in a nation that is not having enough kids anymore, and we have social spending programs like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, 3 most obvious ones that are dependent upon, that were passed in an era where it was simply assumed that we would have increasing populations and shorter lifespans. So when people like Jeb Bush, they don't want to say this in public, and every time they sort of secretly hint at it, they clam up because they realized, oops, I said too much. They want more immigrants because immigrants have more kids. It's not even just the immigrants themselves, which add to the bodies, the warm bodies that will support those safety nets. It's the fact that they have more kids than people who have been here for a while. This is the sort of the original sin of America's social spending programs. It's a pyramid scheme. You can't say I'm not a politician, so I can say it because it's true. It is a pyramid scheme. It's predicated on the fact there will always be more people in the younger generation to pay for the older generation as they retire. But for the first time, with all these baby boomers who are like going to the nursing homes, that isn't the case. And anybody who can do the math and look at the the actuarial tables is crapping out of their mouths right now because this is all going to break bad.
No kidding.
And so
Absolutely.
that's where I think serious people who think about the immigration problem, not even just on the left but on the right, have to think about. We have to make a trade-off. Do we get rid of our social spending programs? Some people would be, okay, great idea. Or do we get rid of immigration?
And you know
'Cause
what's
you can't
interesting
have
about
both.
that? What's interesting about that is that you hear a kind of a similar entitlement, welfare state argument from the Sessions folks too, which is as long as we have a welfare state, as long as we have food stamps and Medicaid and all this stuff, if we have a dramatic influx of low income, low wage people, our entitlement programs will not be able to sustain them.
This is the
So
Milton
it's
Friedman
like this
argument.
kind of forces the question on both ways, right? Is the entitlement program, is our entitlement programs going to fail because there aren't enough kids? Or are the entitlement programs going to fail because there's an influx of low wage workers and because as Sessions argues, immigrants are more likely to go on these entitlement programs.
Well, this is the classic Milton Friedman argument. He said he was very libertarian, obviously. He's a libertarian economist, the Nobel winner. And, he took a very heterodox position in the libertarian world, which is generally very open borders, very kind of like everybody should come in. He said, no. In a country where you have a welfare state, you can't have open borders, precisely because, as you said, it's kind of like an attractive nuisance. It's going to bring people in. And if these people are illegal immigrants, they're not paying in terms of Social Security. They're not paying taxes. They're going to draw on the system without contributing to it. But the question here is the difference between legal immigration and illegal immigration. The reason these people say we want these illegals to, quote, come out of the shadows, amnesty, or increase legal immigration, they're not going to admit this, but really it's because they want them paying in to the social programs, the social safety net, because those people right now aren't doing that. I mean, the only place they're remotely doing that is on things like sales taxes, because they don't pay income tax, They don't do anything else. And
the guys standing in front of 7-Eleven who work on a construction site for $20 a day
They're paying
are not,
cash.
there's not anything coming out of their paychecks, right?
Exactly. There's no withholding for them. So the reason